There we go. We're on
All right,
YouTube.
then we'll progressively get more in here. I was impressed by how many we had listening at last time.
Yeah, last time there was a lot of people who were not regulars. Because they're and well, they've made themselves continual regulars in the text chat, and we've all sighed. But they they kind of just happened to join when we got started with that, and a lot of them, of course, are not believers, but not non-believers in the way you're not non-believer, but more non-believers in the way we're like, they could do some more research, you know what I mean? So but they a bunch of them joined, and they'll join sometimes here and there, but so yeah, we kind of filled up the call. There's Aiden. There's other people who are regulars who are can't make it, like Nighthawk, who I miss greatly. He needs to stop working in his job and whatever, but so yeah, I'm streaming on YouTube. If you want to see me on camera, you need to go there, because if I put it on Discord, it will not appear on OBS.
That's okay. So I'm seeing the stream is mostly, I'm looking at mostly Google right now. So yeah. Do you want to make it so it's like just us?
Yeah, I can do that. What we do for now is I'll just make us big like this. I don't know why my camera's being like that. Like, I don't like how there's all this extra border. Why is it doing that? Let's do defaults and see what happens.
No, hey, it was more than 8. It was more than 8. I think there was like, I don't know, like 15? Something like that. I don't remember.
15
at least, and that was in this. Defense about Christianity. Well, it shouldn't. Well, maybe.
So then I'll just get rid of the Chrome for now, and then if we need to bring up the Chrome, we'll do it later. We'll just do black screen, couple of cams, no big deal.
Yeah, this isn't going to be a religion, world-bending conversation. At least it shouldn't be. I mean, any secondary implications that you come up with from the kind of topics that we talk on, that's all on you. But I'm not going to be trying to change anybody's opinion.
Yeah, we're going to be just
at least in morality. I think I can.
Okay. Well, okay. All that being said, I'm excited. So let's get going. We have probably as much as 2 hours before me and Alphanetic are going to be worn out and want to go to bed. So we'll just get right into it and not mince any time. Okay, Sean, chill. Just listen. But yeah, I mean, today we want to talk about morality. I know that me and Alphanetic have not shared our views as in detail on this topic yet. So some of it might be us trying to understand each other's worldview and begin that conversation. We're obviously open to many conversations in the future if we have to, because we love interacting with each other. So yeah, I mean, we want to get into it. Obviously, Alphanetic, as you know, has been writing a paper. If you want to speak on that, anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, so all right, so this is pretty much what I've been doing for quite a while. I'm a philosophy student, and
a cute one at that.
Working in publishing. What's that?
Nothing. I just said, and a cute one at that. So yeah, just being off topic.
Yeah, no. So I'm a philosophy student. So I've been actively writing my first article for publication. I submitted at least like a very elementary version of it for like a scholarship, and that won the scholarship. So let's go. But it was like a philosophy writing like competition that I won. So I understand this topic very well. Now again, I have no intention of changing anybody's worldviews, but I do think that we can have some pretty interesting conversation. Sharing is caring. That's so true.
Yeah. I agree, and I'm excited to see that paper when it's fully released. Anybody would have the ability to read that, which would be fun for anyone interested. I had the joy of engaging with it and trying to think through it as best I can. So I found that interesting. So I guess we can just get started then. Where we probably need to start is just getting out some of our general views on morality, and then we'll see if it lets us move into animal suffering, and when it does, which is what your paper's on, and then and how it does. And again, of course, if we need to, we can always have many conversations in the future to get through all the details. But so I guess we'll start with you, Alphanetic. I know there's a lot of different views that atheists take on morality. I know, just people that come to mind, Sam Harris and Alex O'Connor, say, have very different views on morality. And when I hear them talk about each other, they don't seem like they agree with each other very much, to be honest. Sam Harris would seem to me to be a moral realist who tries to justify morality through a naturalistic perspective, which means that he just tries to justify morality from an atheistic worldview that, again, only observes the world through what it can methodically extract through physical observation and science and things like that. Someone like Alex O'Connor, I mean, I listened to a debate he did 7 years ago, and sometimes with Alex O'Connor, I'm just like, I don't think he really knows what he believes, to be honest, because he just like he's somewhat coherent and very smart in a lot of cases, but then he'll get so far down rabbit trails on what it seems to me just be trying to squirm around on philosophy that I think you just get lost in his non-cognitivist position. So, and that would be a position that says that there is no moral realism, moral statements, or moral, not facts, but just the things we say about morality, moral claims are just simply from the feelings. He's not an emotivist, meaning that they're only feelings, but they're I guess, subjective claims to truth or beliefs by people. So he would not try to assert any realistic, objective moral values through his naturalism. So those would be differences. Alphanetic, talk about where you fall and kind of your views on those things.
Yeah, so in the most unsatisfying way, I am at a point right now. It's funny that you mentioned Sam Harris. I literally have the book right here.
The Moral Landscape? The Moral Landscape.
So I've read it. In the worst way possible, I'm a moral agnostic. When it comes to a moral realistic perspective, which is that moral truths exist, murder is wrong in the same way that 2 + 2 is 5 is wrong.
Yeah.
The two are they are true, independent of human thought. That's the way that we kind of articulate moral realism, right? Here's the thing. In all honesty, I don't know. However, I also don't think it matters in the sense that we try and illustrate it does. I don't think that, if murder is wrong to, the sun or an alien is really the question that we should be asking. In all honesty, I think it's more of just what do we have right now? What can we look at? How can we mitigate damage? How can we try and build each other up? How can we have the best possible state of world, right? That's kind of what we are working towards. As for whether or not it is objectively wrong to kill somebody, I don't know. I don't know if it's objectively wrong. However, I do know that there are objectively worse states than others. It is an objectively worse state to put your hand on a stove and leave it there. If you don't believe me, go and do it. It is an objective thing that we can measure when we have negative psychological effects from it. And we can also be compassionate. I understand that I don't want to have my hand on the stove. So why would I imagine that somebody else doesn't want to have, or does want to have their hand on the stove?
Yeah.
Right? If I don't want it, why would somebody else want it? So why should I care about their opinion? Well, we have compassion, right? I'm able to say, hey, I don't want to hurt somebody because that doesn't feel good. Maybe that's selfish, and maybe that means that all of morality is built around ourselves. But
that's ego. What is it? Egotism. Egoism. Yeah.
But regardless, it doesn't matter. The point still stands that morality is something that we can explain in a naturalistic perspective.
Okay. All right.
That's pretty much where we disagree.
Yes, we do. I will just to kind of, again, for the information of everybody listening, I obviously take the perspective that morality is only coherent in a perspective that has a God. Again, the Christian God it takes more arguments than the moral one to get there. I'm not going to pretend like the moral argument is sufficient to then bow the knee to Christ if you're taking that angle. But it is, I believe, sufficient to indicate the likeliness of a God, at least inductively, over the likeliness of naturalistic a naturalistic worldview or existence, I would say that it is sufficient to say that there must be a God. But at least to put out the general, simple, basic moral argument so you can see what we're kind of contending over, and then we'll talk about it. I'll just give Craig's. Craig's is at least super simple. There's other ones that I think are more like coherent in the sense where they're more detailed, but I'll just offer this one just so we have a starting point, if that's all right with you. And Craig's goes like this: if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values do exist. That's claim 2. Therefore, God exists. And so that's in its most basic form. And basically, my perspective is objective moral values cannot exist without God, or at least a grounding source outside of humans, which I would argue could only be God. Now, is it the Christian God? I believe it is, but that's not what this argument's really arguing for. It's arguing for it is a God, a transcendental personal being. So, and we'll get into, we'll clash on that, I'm sure, but that's just my starting point. I guess I have to ask Alphanetic, because two things came up in your initial explanation. You were talking about, the compassion, at least the compassionate sense, which drives you to say that you wouldn't want someone else to put their hand on a stove because you realize it's hot. And then also some words regarding murder, and that we shouldn't murder because that state is lesser, that is less desirable. There are a million questions I could ask, but one of them is, do you see, what is the difference, or I guess maybe even similarity? I don't know how you see them. Do you draw a distinction between something like, well, you shouldn't put your hand on the stove versus you shouldn't murder?
I think that they're both, well, I mean, obviously they're two different things, but I'm just essentially illustrating that there are worse states than other states. Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. And and if you don't believe that, if you don't believe that there's worse states than other states, then go and put your hand on the stove and come back to me. That's the way that St. Harris was raised.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, they're connected, but one of them's not really an ethical question. It's kind of just to prove a point.
Yeah.
So I'm curious then. So where is in this whole framework that I've illustrated, right? I'm pretty much really just talking on naturalism. Where is the disconnect? Where do we disagree here?
Okay, so I would say that the disagreement will happen in, while you might say one should not murder, you don't have a grounding to which you can say one ought not murder, being a statement that can be made in all cases. Meaning you can't call true the statement you ought not to murder and ground that in your worldview. I guess that would be at least a starting position. One of the reasons I asked you about the distinction is I wanted to get the sense of if you might if you do recognize the difference between saying you ought not put your hand on the stove versus you ought not murder or shouldn't, as one of them being a kind of a factual claim, like a logical ought, and one of them being, well, at least a supposed moral ought.
Right. So then it's like, why exactly why should we have put a stop to what was going on with the Holocaust, right? Why should we have intervened? What's the standard that we're using? Well, I mean, it's kind of what I've already somewhat illustrated, that we understand that there is a worse state than another state, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if we can use this word or should be using this word ought. Again, I don't think it really matters in all honesty. I really think it's just, I can see that something is going on that I do not want.
Okay.
Something that I feel bad that is happening, and I can maybe put a stop to it, mm-hmm. right? Why would I want to impose this suffering? And if somebody's doing it and I can do something about it, why wouldn't I want to? I have compassion. I can understand that this is not a state I want to be in, and it makes me feel a certain way. Who cares about what you ought to do? I am going to do something about it, and I can feel something in there.
Well, I mean,
that right there is morality.
And that,
I'm not making any ought claims.
Well,
I'm just saying that morality itself is something we can explain.
Well, I would slow down there and say that, like, I understand the point you're making in the experiential sense. Like, if I see someone suffering, or if or even hand on the stove and all those examples you brought up, I agree. I also want to not let that happen, or if there's anything I could do, I would want to not do that. What is the reasoning for that? Because I feel that desire in my heart. I have a nature. My nature, again, in most cases, would see that and want to not let that happen, knowing how suffering feels and knowing and having some inherent sense of not wanting suffering to be happening. But I don't think that touches the topic of morality. The idea of morality is about oughts. It's about obligations, meaning that, well, you might want to prevent suffering. You might see a situation where somebody is suffering and say, I don't want that to happen because I feel super strongly that I really don't want to let that happen. And you know what? Most of these people around me do too. And therefore, we together are going to prevent suffering. But you still can't then jump to make the statement, well, then we ought to, or we're obligated to prevent suffering. If you see a 5-year-old kid drowning in water, I would say that you shouldn't just want to save them, you are obligated to save them. It would be wrong when you're capable of saving that kid to not save that kid. I don't think that your worldview can justify saying that you are obligated to save that kid in that situation, even though it could justify or at least make sense of the fact that most alphanetics in that situation would want to save that kid from the water.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is in what is it? Utilitarianism. There's some distinctions between like rule utilitarianism, right? And this is kind of the idea that the reason that we don't have those really obscure scenarios like, 100 people want to rape somebody and they're going to have more happiness than this one person, so the right thing to do is to rape this person. Of course not. No. And this is kind of what we get into with law and why law is something that we have to have, why we have to abide by some form of standard. This is how we can have society. If we have a world and we reside in this world where the right thing to do is for 100 people to rape this one person, what ends up happening is we're not able to actually sustain a society, and that amount of happiness and that amount of suffering will actually, in the end, dwindle. Because we're not going to be able to be structured. We're not going to have some form of consistency. It's just going to be whatever we're kind of feeling is the best thing in the moment, which obviously, in turn, ends up doing the opposite of what we want, which we then have less joy. We have more suffering because of that.
Okay.
Right?
Well, let's stop you there. So you base our moral choices or posits on either the fact or the assumption that we all want society to progress in a specific way?
Yeah, for the most part.
And so how do you come to the description of what it looks like for society to progress? What does that look like? How do you know that your view of that is correct? In the sense where, well, you say, well, this is how society should progress, therefore all these other types of things are going to phase out. When other people, given, that everybody is able to come to their own opinion and bring it to the table in this particular scenario, might say, well, I want this, or I think this is flourishing. How do you distinctify and make your flourishing be the objective best way to flourish?
Well, the same way I convince somebody that my favorite cereal is better than their stupid.
But that would make then your morality based on your subjective opinion of what it looks like to flourish. That doesn't ground it in anything.
Oh, no, well, that wasn't necessarily a morality claim. You're saying, well, how do you know that your culture is cooler than theirs? Well, I don't. That's the whole idea. I don't know if my culture is more right than another person's culture. However, I do know that some things can be better substantiated than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because I believe something really hard and somebody else believes something really hard too, just because they have a specific level of confidence doesn't mean that they are as substantiated as I am, right? I'm able to say that murder is wrong because of the severe negative effects, not just on that person that is being murdered, but on everybody around them and the
why does
whole
that make
system
it wrong
that we have in play.
But why is the fact that a person experiences severe negative effects make murder wrong?
Because that's what. So these negative effects. Remember, this is this state of not fun, right? Imaginative vocabulary that I have. This is a state of I don't want this. this is really bad, my whole experience would be demonstrably different in a horrible way, just pretty much based on my feelings, if I was in that person's scenario.
Okay.
So it's wrong for somebody to murder somebody. Yeah, maybe it is in this. Maybe it is in morality a subjective kind of wrong, but it doesn't mean that it's unsubstantiated. And I don't think because we struggle with putting absolute truth claims on, murder being wrong in the same way that 2 + 2 is 4, I don't think that's really a problem. It's just that I'm able to give pretty valid reason as to why we shouldn't do it. And if we don't abide by it, then we are not going to be able to have a culture that is able to bring about the most amount of prospering.
Well, it would seem to me...
maybe prospering subjective, sure, but we can pretty much all agree that there are better states than others. Again, put your hand on a stove if you don't agree with me.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we strive for that?
Well, again, a better is a subjective term, but it would seem to me that given the worldview you're presenting, the only person that you could convince of a particular, what maybe your own personal prescribed morality, the only person you could convince of that is yourself, or maybe someone else who would subscribe to your perspective, your subjective emotivism, emotivism in the sense, emotion in the sense where you're arguing from experience, not necessarily the emotivist position of knowledge, but that's different. But I'm saying it would seem to me that like your worldview doesn't ground that. Like you might be able to say, well, murder is going to produce less good states, right? And come on, guys, we all agree murder is not so great, and you wouldn't want to be murdered, and I agree, I wouldn't want to be. And I would agree that you point out that murder would create less society, and so in the definition you have of a flourishing society, where I guess there are more people and less death, yes, that would produce a better society according to your definition. But in no way does that ground it to say where, like, you couldn't say to someone else, you are obligated not to murder, or you ought not murder, or you should not murder in the kind of the factually moral sense. You could only say it maybe at best in the logical sense, because your appeal to that is simply subjective. And so like when I then say, when we look at the world and we realize functionally and pragmatically and just in the experiential way, the way that we live and approach moral facts is not that they're subjective preferences. It's not a matter of like, wait a minute, let's put our preferences together and we all want society to have more people, so let's see which preferences yield the most flourishing. No, people can say dogmatically and we live this way that, murder's wrong, and it's always wrong. Alphanetic, if you're angry in 24 hours and super angry because of some way you were wronged and your short life on this earth was really affected by that, it would still be wrong to murder. And like that kind of statement that is overarching, that transcends you and your preference about how society should build, that has to be grounded in something. That can't just be grounded in, well, I think society should flourish like this, and I know that we like the state of not being murdered more, and therefore we ought not to murder.
That is a grounding.
But it's not. Itself. It's not a grounding in a
2 + 2 is 4 grounding, but it's a grounding.
But not in
something that I can pretty much measure to a pretty solid amount. Like, and even then, here's the issue that I seem to have a lot of times when I get into discussions with people.
Yeah.
Is that it's often seen as this absolute mic drop when I can't say on an objective scale that somebody should or ought not murder somebody. Well, again, I can substantiate it, but even then, I'll allow that. I'll go into a anti-realist perspective here.
Wait, but it seems like you're not in a moral realist perspective right now anyway. Like, it seems like you're a kind of non-cognitivist
well, as
here.
I kind of said before, I really don't, I'm more of a moral agnostic. I think you can defend it both ways, but regardless, I don't think you need a divine deity in order to tell you that murder is wrong. That's where I have a serious problem.
But wait, can I pause you there? I just want to respond to this because you've said this before. I agree. I don't think you need a divine deity to tell you that murder is wrong. I think you need a divine deity to tell you that you are obligated not to murder. right? I mean, I think the atheist is as capable as the Christian as knowing that murder is a wrong thing to do and a harmful thing to do. Moral knowledge, I have no issue with. I think that you cannot ground the statement that murder is wrong in the ontological sense, which means that you are obligated not to murder. You ought not murder unless you have grounding in a God. And that's the distinction I'm making. It's not about whether we can know what's good or bad and identify harmful or non-harmful. It's about whether we can ground it in something that aligns with how ontological and transcendental the moral claims we make about the world are. If you can't do that, then you have to at a certain point say, you know what, I'm Alphanetic and I say we shouldn't murder, but you know what, if someone else comes along to you and says, you know what, I do want to murder and I think I should murder, you could not tell them that their particular preference is wrong, because you would have to accept, well, what if that is their idea of human flourishing, their idea of how things could progress or how the world should be includes that they do get to murder, and you have no basis to say that they are definitively wrong and can't live that way.
Sorry, I just got absolutely distracted.
That's okay.
Take a second to look at the chat.
So what's going on? Bro, I don't want to hear about lightning glare. I do not want to hear about lightning. Don't even.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Okay.
That's funny, Sean. But
yeah, sorry. That absolutely.
That has to get the.
Repeat the last.
Yeah. Basically, what I was pointing out is that your position does not allow, like if someone came with an opposing view, which said that whatever their particular idea for human flourishing was, or society, or the things you try to ground this in, if they were like, you know what, for me it includes that I get to murder and I want to murder and that makes me happy and that makes me and the group of people I'm with or whatever flourish, you don't have a grounds in which to say that that is definitively wrong, or that they ought not do that, or that they could not do that, because that creates an issue. Remember, I want to make the point that the question here, or the difference here, is not about whether we can know good and bad, and that we can identify harmful or non-harmful, or however we want to phrase it. It's about that we can ground those statements in the way we use them, which is very ontological by nature, in a way where we have oughts and obligations and accountabilities to the moral things that we claim, which again, experientially, we all claim them as absolutes. We don't say, well, murder is wrong, but it's good sometimes, or yeah, it's a preference and you can do it as you wish.
Yeah,
and I don't think your worldview you can do that.
I want to interject. So, yes, societally, we are not going to say that murder is a right thing to do. If we're getting into the philosophy territory, then maybe we can have that discussion and we can say, you know what, technically, it's not wrong objectively, and I can't make an ought statement. But the funny thing about it is that regardless, remember, I am able to substantiate it, and I am able to make a good case as to why we should not murder. Granted, that does not mean that there is an ought statement that comes with that. I don't think that's a problem. In all honesty, I really don't.
Well, I think history would beg to differ, Alphanetic.
What's that?
I think history would beg to differ. I think there are numerous people.
The thing, society would also differ, and everybody. And the thing is, me too. I do not think that we should kill people. If we're getting into the nitty gritty about objective statements, okay, sure. But this is why I think that it doesn't really matter. We shouldn't murder, but I think that's a fine claim to make. I think that's a good claim to make.
I accept.
We shouldn't do it. But ought is a objective 2 + 2 = 4 factual statement, and I like to stay away from those when we get into ethics, because pretty much always when we come up with a standard of morality, there's always going to be some form of exception.
Okay.
In mathematics, there's not. There's no exceptions in mathematics. And if there are,
well, I tell that to all the classes I've ever taken in calculus, but yeah.
Well, then enlighten me. Am I incorrect on that?
No. That was just a joke, because there's always like you learn some equation early on in you. But here's what I'll say to that. The ought question is not a question of is there exceptions or not. When I say murder is wrong and it's always wrong ontologically. It's making a statement about the nature of the morality, not about the type of situation, right? I mean, of course, when you bring up, there's an exception. What if you're in self-defense, or someone's about to kill a child and you kill them because
like a trolley problem.
What I'm saying is that grounding moral absolutes would be able to make sense of all situations that would posit a possible moral conclusion, right? I mean, so like when you have them, no matter the situation, you can, as best you can, you come to a final answer, which instead of saying I prefer you don't do this, or I don't think you should do this, or I don't think it's as positively valuable to do this, you could actually say you are obligated, or you definitely should not do this. It would be wrong to do this. And that's really what it's about. It's not about are there exceptions or not. It's about when we answer morality. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So exceptions do not disprove a rule. You're right. And this is not, because I'm kind of reading the chat a little bit. So
me too. I have it open.
However, that just points to me that because there's so many exceptions in so many different scenarios, and because we have so many different standards of ethics, right? We have utilitarianism, we have virtue ethics, we have deontology, we have emotivism, we have theistic moral realism. It's like, okay, like, how am I supposed to know if there's a right one when there's always seems to be a pretty compatible answer in so many different ballparks, right? I feel like we are simply trying to build an impossible puzzle. We're trying to build a key to a door that can't be opened. And in all honesty, I think we can get close. We can say there's worse states than other states. I don't want this. I can see somebody else probably wouldn't want this. If we want to prosper because prospering makes me feel good and it's going to make other people feel good, then why wouldn't I want that? And in all honesty, I don't think that it's a problem that I can't say you ought not to murder, and I have to restrict myself to you should not murder on a technicality because of my philosophy background, right?
Like, well, I mean, I wouldn't say a technicality. I would just say.
Also, hold on. So
okay.
But this here is when I want to diverge a little bit.
Sure.
Because this is the second thing that I really do want to get into, which is that in all honesty, you would then proceed to point to, I know this is kind of outside of the moral argument, but the secondary implication from most people and pretty much everybody in this call right now, or most people, watching the video back, is that this means that the Bible is probably true, which this is when I have my issues.
That's not the implication.
Well, it's not. However, this is where I would kind of like to diverge a little bit, because you're right. It shouldn't be a secondary implication, and I stand by that. But I also really want to test you a little bit here that the Bible is not a great book. It is not a book that upholds this standard of ethics that we demand an explanation.
Depending on how you mean that, I agree.
We have stories of God sicking a bear on some teenage boys because they were making fun of a bald guy.
That's out of contextually, but that's fine.
Out civilizations.
Yeah.
We have problems like animal suffering, which could not have been done by a perfect moral arbiter.
As you say.
But this is my point. We have this mysterious thing called ethics and morality, and we don't have an immediate explanation, and people seem to always go to thing doesn't make sense, thing doesn't have immediate naturalistic explanation, therefore God exists, and therefore
that's not the argument.
Deity exists.
That's not the argument. And so go ahead. Sorry.
One final sentence. My issue is that this standard of morality that we say demands such an explanation, well, the arbiter that we seem to always go and point to doesn't even uphold this standard of morality themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
And
so
I'd really like to go into that.
Sure. I mean, interesting, Sean. You gotta love Sean though. But no. Okay. Good points. I think that, and I'm just trying to track with you as best I can. I will say that the moral argument is not one that implies the truth of the Bible. Okay. I think that people might make that implication just because they already are Christian, but that's really not, the moral argument is not accomplishing that. The moral argument is simply saying that because we have objective moral values, okay, that those objective moral values must be grounded in something outside ourselves. It's simply not sufficient to say, well, I prefer and other people prefer that we live this way because it makes us feel happier. Therefore, we ought to live this way, and everybody will just conform to that. That's not true. I would love to see how your ideas would change the hearts of the many people who have committed the many genocides across the many history that we've had, and all the evil, the individual evil that interacts between people, either on a murderous level or just simply a dishonest level. The way people treat each other does not contort with your view, because the continually, daily, people disregard other people and how happy they are and how satisfied they are and how fully joyful they are, at the cost of their own interests, at the cost of their stupidity. This is your world is it feels like a fantastical utopia that says, well, I mean, we all know these things, guys, so let's just get after it. And it just doesn't seem to be, it's not grounded in anything where I can't say to the person who's treating even in the small sense, I can't say to the person who's treating all his friends like crap in your worldview, yeah, you're doing something you shouldn't do. I can only say, well, I don't like it. And that is not a sufficient way, I think, to live reality. I'll get to the other, I'll let you respond, but then I'll move on to the Bible stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't really have much new to say here. I mean, it really is just that there is a standard that we're using, and maybe yeah, we don't live like that, and yeah, maybe there are exceptions, right? Maybe there are people that not maybe there are people out there that live for themselves and don't really care, and then there also are people who really do care. I think that's just a result of having diverse brain chemistry.
It's not a standard if it's up for, in a sense, that every human being subjectively will define it differently. That's not a standard, because no one's going to define what you call societal flourishing and joy the same way you do. It's not something you can appeal to. I mean, maybe in murder, a lot of your guys' views might line up, whoever that would be, but it's not going to continually line up in all things. And the subjectivity of it will cause an impossibility, an impasse. And let's say we actually tried to live out this functional society where we got all the Alphanetics together in the world and had them try to talk out the societal way to live so that we have the least amount of harm. You'd never end the conversation, sir. Because there is no way to get past the subjectivity and say, you know what, we know that this particular way to live, or these particular types of actions, these are the way we should live. This is correct. This is going to bring the most joy and fulfillment of righteousness. I will say I do have that in the Word of God, and we'll get to the other stuff you brought up in a second. But I mean, you don't have that in just the discussion. And I mean, it seems like a hope.
We have history. We have history. We can understand that if everybody's going around killing each other, we're not going to friggin' like prosper in any way. And that standard of prospering is just, I mean, look around you. If you want to say that prospering isn't something that we can measure, are we doing pretty good right now? Are we doing better right now?
I mean, we're doing better now in the general sense because of the increased amount of people and the progress we've made technologically and things like that. But people are killing at the same rate they always have. You know what? It takes only a little bit of selfishness to bring upon just an absolutely disregard for these. I mean, again, it's hard to really get even much into the moral argument, because the position you offer is just a hopeful one. It's just like, well, these are the things I feel like we should live by these things. And humans are just gonna, they're gonna realize it at a certain point. I mean, there's not really much place to go there, Alphanetic.
No, okay. I mean, we know what has happened before. We know that if we go around killing each other, nothing good is going to come of it. We're not going to be able to prosper in the way that we would like to. We aren't going to be able to have, happy families who feel safe and are well fed and are well protected and well entertained if we don't abide by some form of standard.
How do we know that?
We know for a fact that things are not going to go the way that we want and feel them.
What is the basis? We're going to stay here for a second. What is the basis that we know that? You say that we know that going around killing people is not going to produce, I guess, a good or a positive society. So what is our basis there?
Our basis is like what makes a society better than another one.
Well, how do you know that? How do you know what makes a society better and not?
Because I feel a lot better in this one than in another one. And I know you would feel a lot better right here than you would in North Korea.
So just so it's understood,
if you don't believe me, go over there. And yes, I am appealing to feelings here.
Yes, you are.
This is a feeling problem. This is a feeling problem. I think that I have somewhat of an Alex O'Connor position, but I do think that we can substantiate morality simply through emotion. I'm not
So
going
you
to
are an
say that I
well, no, that's not
100% stand
emotivist.
by
Yeah.
that. So I'm not going to stand by that 100%.
Yeah.
Because in all honesty, I don't think it matters too much. But I do think that we can substantiate it. And again, all I'm trying to do is say that there can be a standard of morality without a God.
But it's not a standard if it's based on
believe that
feelings.
Or not a standard, but morality can be explained through a naturalistic perspective.
But it's not.
That's
All
I'm
you're
trying
saying,
to do.
all you're
I'm
proposing is your feelings, and then you're saying your feelings because you feel like your feelings are reasonable explain morality. You haven't shown why
But that's
how
what morality is.
it's
like
so morality is just how you feel.
How do we have these feelings? Hold on. So how do we have these feelings? How do we have? Because this is what the moral argument is. How do we have these feelings? How can I?
That's not what the
intuit
moral
that
argument is.
murder is wrong. How can I do that? Oh, well, I have to do it through God. No.
No.
Don't.
Again, I think you're confusing epistemology and ontology. I mean, it's not about. I mean, I don't even know if you're talking epistemologically here because it doesn't seem like you're even getting to the fact that we can know them. It just seems like you're saying that we can emote them. We can. It almost feels like a form of emotivism, and which again, it would just be the fact that moral statements are simply feelings.
So, Tunic, the moral argument is that moral realism is a thing, and the only way that we can explain moral realism is through God. That's the idea. However, moral realism is the thing that we are talking about right now.
But it seems like you wanted to define yourself as a moral realist, but then when pushed, you say, "Well, it's just about how you feel."
No, I'm not a moral.
But again, the moral argument is ontological. It's identifying objective moral principles, a moral ought people live by. You should not murder. You should never murder. It's never right to murder. Okay, and how do we ground that? How can we consistently say, "Well, actually, it isn't ever. You're obligated not to murder. You ought to not murder," and that can only be grounded in a God. That can't be grounded in feelings. It's not a standard to say I feel this way because even if you find 10 other people who feel the same and you could start your own island, I mean, again, you're not on an objective basis. Feelings change. Your feelings change. I mean, what's to even say, even internally inside yourself, that your feelings will not change on the same matters? So the feeling-based moral argument is not moral because it's not making moral claims of right and wrong, and it's also internally inconsistent because it has to bet on the fact that your feelings themselves won't change on these topics, but the likeliness of just according to human growth and experience is that even your own will. And so I don't understand how we're talking about morality at all when we are so far from calling something right and calling something wrong. And when it's just now we're talking about not even moral standards for creating a better society, but simply almost just logical ones. Like I feel so far from moral claims. I feel like what you're offering now is, well, I feel that these intuitive thoughts I'm having would create the best society. That has nothing to do with morality. Those are at best, at the very furthest, logical oughts that you're offering, saying that, well, if we do these things, we would result in this kind of society, and I think that this society is good. So I don't understand where any jump is being made, or even attempted jump is made to right or wrong.
Yeah. So I feel like I don't want to be too redundant, so I think this would be a pretty good time to pivot to.
Yeah, we can. I just want it to be made known that it just feels hyper emotivist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I really am just going to say again, like just kind of to summarize here, this is not a objective claim that I'm trying to make. I'm not trying to do that. All I'm just saying is that we can see that there are states that are worse than other states. I understand that. I have felt very negative states, and I also understand history and how imposing these negative states not only feels bad to me, but has objectively worse consequences than others. Sure, maybe we aren't able to make you ought to not murder, right? Maybe objectively, sure, but I think practically, yeah, we can make that claim and we can substantiate it.
Wait, I want to stay here for a second. How do you know on what basis do you determine which states are worse than other states? Like how do I know that? So you say you're making that claim a lot. Like, and I see what you're saying. You're saying, well, we know that certain states are worse than other states, and so we wouldn't want those, we wouldn't want those worse states, right? So how do you, from your perspective, right, from your approach to understanding knowledge and morality. How can we know what states are worse than others?
I think, well, for one, it's something that's quite self-evident. Again, this is kind of why I really like the hand on the stove thing. Like, if you don't believe it, if you want evidence for it, go and do it.
So is it the
It's like if you don't
experience of
believe
pain that
that
tells
A,
us this?
then B means it's like if you don't agree with like normal logical principles, or if you don't agree with mathematics, go and do it. Go find out. Like we know these things because of experience,
Okay.
and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that.
But so we can only know, and you're saying we can only know what states are worse than others based on subjective experience.
We can also see, actually, I mean, now we have like DTI tractography and MRI scanners. We can see that there's, what we would feel or quantify as a negative emotional state. We can actually measure it, right? Now, it doesn't have in big, bold, bad state on the MRI scanner, but it's a state that we attribute with a negative feeling. And remember, ethics is all about what it is that is, what's going to impose suffering, right? What's going to
Well, that's not what it's about. Ethics is about what's right and wrong. We need to get that definition right, because I have to, as we go through this conversation, I have to continue to remind the audience that we are not at all talking right now about what is right and what is wrong. Even though Alphanetic will go out and functionally live like that every day, there are rights and wrongs and things he won't do and he ought not to do, and blah, blah, blah. And he'll tell people things are wrong if they do them. That's how we live. We are not talking about right or wrong right now. We're talking about worse states versus better states, which can be only seen through subjective experience. I just want to say that because you're going to say we're talking about ethics. We're not talking about ethics. We're not talking about what is good and what is bad in the ontological sense. We're not talking about what is right and what is wrong in the sense where you should do these things and not these things. You're simply positing a society that we build, we progress in some sense towards a better society through experiencing events and then avoiding the ones that create badness. And I would like, as a follow-up, I would like you to maybe define worse states, badness. What is badness? I mean, you say it's self-evidence, but okay, I get it with the stove and the hand, but I mean, how do I consistently define a bad state or a worse state?
Okay. So again, I mean, it's just this state that we can experience as not good, it feels bad. And that might sound unsatisfactory.
I would like a definition, sir. Oh man.
Well, it is what it is.
What is not good?
How do you want me to define it? By what God's standard is?
No, I want you to tell me, how do I know something is not good? Oh, what is not good?
A state not good is just a state of a negative state. It's a state that is this is the problem with ethics, is that it's so hard to define these things.
In your worldview, it is. I don't think it is for me.
Well, this is, I think, where the best, because in all honesty, it's really hard to define it, and that's kind of the whole problem. I'm like, oh, what's the dictionary? Well, there can't be. Remember, this isn't a micro problem. There can't be. That's the idea, and I have not combated that at all. That there can be those states that feel bad. Why would I want somebody else to have it? And that's okay. That's satisfactory.
But let me ask you.
This is a perfect place for me to say, hold on. I think this is a
Sure.
perfect place for me to start now and say, then, Marble Guy, I'm going to ask you a question for the first time today.
Sure.
Then what is your good state? What is your negative state? Let's talk about it.
Okay, sure. I do want to mention one more thing, and it may be in the form of a question, so I apologize. But what about scenarios? And just like I want to see how your worldview stands up to these things. What about scenarios where, from your subjective experience, everything tells you that it feels good, but it is in fact bad, and you don't know it, and you may not know it. You may not be able to find that out a few seconds later. How do you handle that? Or opposite, scenarios that feel in fact bad to the human experience in all forms, but are actually in fact good. Now, I mean, a couple of things I want to hear your response to this, but a couple of things I'll immediately point out is, again, those questions are very hard to answer if we don't define good and bad. And those questions are very hard to, I would say, even determine even if we're attempting to answer them with some idea of good and bad when we're just going off experience. Would you not agree? Like, how would you deal with scenarios like those?
Okay. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I feel like and actually, so there's a reason I asked that question. And because again, I'm redundant at this point. It's really just that there's a state that I can feel is not good.
But
and yeah, it is in your feelings.
Alphanetic, I'm saying, like, in a situation like that, your feelings would actually deceive you, because I'm saying that situation where it feels good, so your feelings would tell you good. All data would tell you it's good based on your worldview. But what if it was in fact bad? The actual result, the end goal of the experience was bad, even though everything in your worldview is telling you it's good, and vice versa. So how can your worldview address those situations? Because
What's the example that you're giving? What's the example that you're giving? I guess I'm. Well, I mean, examples I can think of, but what's the specific example?
I mean, I don't know if I have a specific example in mind. I mean, I would posit things that, like, there's a lot of things to us that feel good.
I gave one. With the 100 people raping somebody. That's the same kind of idea. It's like, well, what about marijuana? Marijuana feels really good. Feels really good in the moment. It's like, well, not in the big picture. Like that, and that's the whole idea. Well, right? We're thinking big picture, not immediate.
But you can only know that if you can then see results down the line on that. Like, you can't, but again, and then on what basis? Let's take marijuana. Let's take marijuana. Yeah. On what basis do you say that the result of marijuana is bad? Like, what is bad?
Because we can see it deteriorates your body.
Why is that bad?
Your body is you.
But why is the deterioration of your body bad? Why can I call it bad?
We call it bad because it's something that does not promote well-being.
Well, then you can call it destructive to the body, but what about it makes it bad?
Because destructive to the body, usually in the vast majority of cases, destruction to the body means destruction to well-being.
Okay, so well-being, personal well-being is affected. I'm asking, what about personal well-being being affected is bad? What makes it bad? Bad being, I mean, I don't know how else to define bad, but I mean, like, literally, it's something that is ontologically not good. It's the nature of the thing. The nature of the destruction of your body is not good, as opposed to the fact that you may not prefer the destruction of your body. I want you to make the jump here. I'm trying to get you to make the jump. Everything you're saying is pointing me out that, yeah, you know what? There's a lot of things that we can experiential experience that will tell us that we would prefer and like to not do these things, and that is the consensus that people might have, okay? But that can only serve to even maybe scratch the surface of preferences for certain people in very specific scenarios. That doesn't tell us, that doesn't do anything for murder. It still leaves it open that a person could say, you know, I prefer to murder, that makes me happy, and you would not be able to say anything to them. So I'm saying, in one sense, I'd like that jump to be made from this is not good for your well-being to this is by its nature bad. I can say that the destruction of your body is by its nature bad. I know you asked me a question, and we'll get back to it too. But I believe that I can say, I can ground that.
Okay. We attribute badness and goodness to well-being or lack thereof well-being. And we do that through feelings. Yeah, we do that through neuroscience. Okay. That's how we do it. And if that's unsatisfactory, then that's unsatisfactory.
It's unfortunately not grounded.
Right there, the disconnect that I think that we have here is that you are looking for further logical proof when in reality, we've made it to the end. We're here. You're looking for divinity, yet there's no gap that needs to be filled.
Well, I'm not looking for divinity. I'm looking for some way that your system could consistently tell me what's right and wrong. I believe that I've shown pretty well at this point that it cannot do that.
I don't really know what more to say apart from just summarize again. This is I feel like we're
yeah, I understand. So I'll leave that at that. I think it's been clear what you're trying to say. We'll leave that. You had a question for me?
Okay. I want to make the jump here. I want us to kind of start going into theistic moral realism, because this is where people here land, right?
Okay.
Theistic moral realism, for those who don't, who aren't 100% sure, is simply the belief system that objective moral truths exist, and the standard is oriented around God. Maybe not exactly what God says. It's not good because God says it's good, but it's a good thing because it's rooted in God's nature, right? This is the idea. Yet, this is when I have to kind of take a second to look then at the deity that we are invoking. This is when I have the problem.
Okay.
Why is it that when we have a standard of morality, a thing that seems to need an explanation, why is it that we immediately point to the biblical deity who clearly does not abide by this moral standard, which seems to go against what the whole moral argument is talking about,
Okay.
and what this theistic moral realism is? Because the standard of morality is the thing that is deeply embedded in God's nature, yet it seems like that standard of morality that's deeply embedded in God's nature doesn't even abide by our own standard, which means that there's two objective standards of morality, or
Well,
morality is
okay.
completely relative
So
based
that's
on God's opinion versus ours.
a good
So
start.
why is it that we have stories like what I said with the children being mauled by the bear? Why is it that we seem to have suffering on this huge scale with predation, yet God supposedly stands by the same standard of morality that invokes such a serious explanation?
Okay. Good. Let's do it. So let's do this one. The Lord sent Israel to wipe out the Canaanites, wipe them out. Not just every man and soldier, every woman, every child, every person in the nation, completely and utterly destroy them. I think that is intense, is it not? Let me ask you a question. So what standard of morality did God break when that happened?
Well-being did not flourish. Not at all.
Okay. Now,
there was a negative state. A
now,
very negative state.
okay.
Very negative implications.
So let me respond by two things. Number
Especially
one,
considering the idea that maybe, I mean, if I'm curious what you would think. Did all the people who died before the crucifixion just go to hell? Because
no,
if those guys all got to hell after
that's
that,
not
this guy surely
theology.
needs a good explanation.
You should brush up on your Old Testament. Genesis 15:6, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. He certainly went to heaven. Credited to him as righteousness, of course, identifying.
He also was a bit of an exception. If any, didn't he become an? Who became an archangel? I forget.
Nobody. Nobody in the Old Testament.
That's on you, but Abraham did not go to heaven upon death. He went to paradise. They're two different.
But that's not the point he's making, Tunic. Obviously, there's paradise and then the eternal state. But that's
after the resurrection. Old Testament people weren't saved until the resurrection, but not everybody before wasn't saved. That's what.
Thank you. But the point he was making is assuming that everybody in the Old Testament goes to what I mean. Again, those differences in theology. He would just say the eternal hell because they were before the resurrection. I mean, Abraham, of course, is quite a figure. You take someone like Rahab or Tamar. I mean, these people, these Gentile women. I think at least Rahab was a Gentile woman. I mean, some might call them insignificant, but they also believed God and received salvation in whatever theological sense Tunic's going to want to explain it. At the end of the day, they're going to heaven. I mean, this is simple Old Testament theology. The Lord is the salvation of his people. The purpose of Israel was not to hide the gospel, or the message of God and his work from the world, but to spread it. It was the disobedience and evil of people that kept it the way it was. But let's talk about the Canaanites. You said to me that the standard broken by God was human flourishing and well-being. That was a negative state, right? Can you cite for me where that has been God's standard of morality, or is that just your standard of morality and flourishing?
Well, remember, so morality is something. The whole reason that we even have this moral argument and this discussion at all is because morality exists and it's clearly here.
Okay,
right? We
I agree.
seem to have this strong, that feels really wrong. Don't kill somebody, please.
Okay.
So that intuition right there is exactly what drives the whole argument. That's where we get this.
Yes.
Right. If it was not for that intuition and we just didn't care, then there would be no discussion. But then we can't immediately say, okay, hey, we have this intuition and I feel this really strongly, and then proceed to point to a being that doesn't even abide by that intuitive standard that drove it in the first
So
place.
again, is the intuitive standard that we avoid all negative states of human well-being, or is the intuitive standard is that there are obligations to moral standards that we should not do? As in, is the standard that all negative states should be avoided, or is the standard that murder is wrong? Because those are not the same thing. And I feel like Alphanetic, what I'm saying is, it seems like the first thing you're doing is you're imposing your standard of, well, human well-being avoids all negative states onto a passage like the slaughter of the Canaanites, with no regard for anything but your particular standard of morality. Now, that doesn't seem like a fair way to approach the text of Scripture. So I'm at least I want to. Well, there's other places we need to go here, but starting there, it would seem like, if you want to you're saying you're taking the Christian God to task for being inconsistent with, well, it would be his standard of morality. But you're offering then a standard of morality that is not necessarily commensurate with what God's standard of morality is. So it seems confusing to hold him accountable for your no, but but what I'm saying is the standard of morality that humans are obligated to live by under the Christian worldview is not the one you're offering. So you can't at least in that sense, you can't say, well, God is inconsistent because he doesn't follow my preference for morality. That's what it sounds like you're saying, because you're not giving a basis or any scripture that says, well, God says that at all points, all negative human experiences should be avoided and human well-being should always be the focus in the way I define human well-being. So I'm very, very confused about what your argument is here, other than I don't like that he did that because I don't feel like it's good.
It's that he's, so things are right according to God's standard or whatever, right? It's whatever. Actually, that's a good question. Does God have a standard?
Sure does.
Or whatever he feels?
No. Feels I think would be incorrect. I think God's standard is intrinsic to his nature. It doesn't change and flop back and forth based on emotion. This is not a emotion based kind of question. Remember, as far as morality is ontological to us, it's intrinsic to God. That's why his law, which is written in Leviticus, also never changes up through today, right? That's why I can read Leviticus and learn morality, because God is who he is by nature, which means that when God says in Leviticus 18, in Leviticus 18, he says, don't sleep with a man as you sleep with a woman. I can also take that as applicable for today, knowing that God still holds that same standard. And I think you can see that consistency in the Bible as you read how the apostles and Jesus and everything respond to the Old Testament laws. Yeah.
Okay. So God's standard of morality then is what it is that is deeply embedded within him.
Well, I only pointed that out to say it's not based in feeling. I just want to. His standard of morality is based, if you want to base it off of something that I think is more understandable to you, it's based off the value of human life, the fact that we're made in the image of God. Okay, so the prescriptions and the laws in, say, Leviticus, if you read them carefully and you actually read what is being said, not just what TikTok has told you it says, the basis of those laws, and Jesus sums it up in the New Testament, and it's also written in Leviticus, is you should love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is the full commandment. Basically, what it points out, and you go through all the commandments carefully, they all have to do with loving God with all your heart, right? The relationship with God, a full, complete, righteous one, and then loving people to the fullness of your heart, as the Lord loves you, as you would love the Lord, in order for the image of God to be taken seriously and valued and maintained. So that, like, when you talk about God's standard, that is the standard. But I will point this out: the standard, how to carry out that standard, is not defined subjectively by every individual person. It is defined defined objectively by the way God says, which means that when we have the cultural issue, just as an example, the cultural issue of, say, homosexuality, and a lot of people say, well, but these people feel like they want to do this and they love doing this. And how can you get in the way of their love? You're prohibiting human flourishing, and you're prohibiting their happiness. Again, the pushback there is that the human's subjective experience and preference is not the wiser and correct and ontologically sound and consistent morality as over opposed to what God's standard is, which means that when God says, well, you shouldn't do that, and of course the argument for that is large and is according to how God designed people to work and things like that, and people like, well, I feel happy when I do it, the question of what's right does not then rest in the person's feelings and emotions in a given moment.
Yeah, so I don't know what standard of morality God would have that allows for extraordinary amounts of animal suffering that we see. This is a huge problem that we have. This is a serious problem. I mean, it really is. And the thing is, if you start demanding an explanation for it and saying, oh, well, God, there has to be an explanation for it, well, then why are you questioning God, right? Well, apparently it's right just because God it has it deeply embedded in his nature for some reason. It seems a little bit arbitrary, this whatever this is. Maybe it's not a standard, whatever word you want to use to attribute it. Seems like it's relatively arbitrary if it allows for trillions upon trillions of animals to be deeply slaughtered in these glorified Hunger Games that they reside in.
Yeah.
Murder's wrong to us? Like what's going on here? Why is there such diversity in what's A-okay and what's not? That's a problem.
Okay.
And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Okay, great. So a few things. I just want to roll back a little bit because I want to cover everything. I will point out that one of the questions I'd immediately ask you that you can answer later would be this idea of a problem doesn't seem. Again, it just doesn't seem like a statement that you should be able to make from your worldview. I mean, what is, from your worldview, a naturalistic worldview, what is problematic about the death of animals besides your subjective feelings? I mean, what's the problem? What is like consistently or problematic about that to where I need to be concerned? Besides the fact that your emotions tell you, I will.
So here's the thing. I'm just gonna kind of throw that back at you because you already know.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? Why is it wrong for you to go to a dog and tear its head open?
That's a good question. I believe that would have to do. I think God's standard. Like, for example, in Leviticus, it talks about animal cruelty, and it talks about how that it is wrong to treat, let's say I think it's your donkey or your camel wrong. And if you were to find someone doing that there's some sort of punishment doled out, because the wrongness of that has to do with the revealing of the sin in a person's heart. If I were to go up to, I have a dog in my house right now. Taking care of my dog for my parents are away. If I were to go over to Jake right now, Jake, he's such a cutie. If I were to go over him right now and just beat the crap out of him, no reason, right? He's not trying to bite me and kill me on my neck or whatever. No, I just go over there and just hit him hard, just am cruel. That's wrong. Why? Is it simply just because the animal suffers some pain? No, it's also because, or more importantly, because my heart is revealing a problematic, unreasonable anger. It's revealing a hatred that is not commensurate with God's character and his righteousness. The image of God in me is not is corrupted when it expresses a hatred, when it expresses cruelty and wants to commit harm to other people. This is why murder is wrong. It's not just because, well, a human life ends. In the biblical perspective, it's wrong because you're treating the image of God as something, first of all, that you have control over, and something else that you disregard its value. And so I think that the biblical perspective certainly can understand why treating animals, specifically treating animals with contempt and hurting them, would be wrong. That's not the same as the general suffering of animals. But I want to come back to that. As far as, just to wrap up the Canaanite thing.
Okay, so it's not okay. Why? Because it sounds like you're kind of appealing to an emotion.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that God has a standard for how we're supposed to treat other people and treat his creation.
God doesn't have to follow that standard, which means that there's what? two standards.
No, it does not mean that. And that's why I was trying to get back to the Canaanite thing, if you would let me do that. Because I brought that up myself for a reason. And I wanted to point out that the piece of the puzzle that you miss or ignore or do not yet fully understand would be the idea of sin and justice. And this is not a part of your worldview and not a part of the experiential human flourishing, whatever, right? So I think that when you take the Canaanite story, the reason that God, I would say you can't call God whatever your standard for wrong is again floats around, but whatever you would call wrong, you can't call God wrong there, and as an internal inconsistency in the Christian worldview, because God is punishing the Canaanites justly according to their sin. Now you can say, well, I don't believe in sin, but again, you're making an internal critique of internal critique of the consistency of the Christian worldview, and God makes it clear, and you read this in the prophets where it talks about the Canaanites, and then it also talks about when later God brings the Assyrians up back against the Israelites. And always the point is, because of their wickedness, I will punish them. The means by which he punishes them, which in some cases is the armies of the world, some cases might be, I don't know, natural disaster, some cases might be famine or disease in Israel. This happened to Israel. That means is not something that it's just not relevant in the sense where God is able to do that, not because he's just, well, I said don't murder, but I'm going to go around and murder. No, because he is the judge who is able to dole out justice. Now, if you're going to say to me they don't deserve that justice, then you have to convince me that people aren't sinning. But you're making a critique of my worldview, which says that people are sinning and people deserve that justice to be brought to bear on them. So if God wants to destroy a nation because they're wicked, he is just in doing so.
Okay, so my critique is on God's standard here, because again, I'm saying what standard is he using, if any, that promotes, well-being, and it promotes, having these happy marriages, and it promotes wanting to go and worship him, but also doesn't care at all about the well-being of all of the oxen and the cattle that are being slaughtered in the story of Achan and Job. Also in Joshua, when God he commands Joshua to like hamstring horses, which is like slice their Achilles tendon, not because the horses messed up, but because they don't want he's got to punish the soldiers.
Okay.
Right. So it's like, what standard of morality is God using that is allowing this kind of brutality?
Okay.
And the answer here shouldn't be well, then what's your standard? Because you got to get
no.
I'm very okay to be like, okay, I'm trying to be convinced of this divine being. I want to see evidence for it. Yet the one that you're pointing to that apparently demands such explanation for all moral standards seems to be morally apparent.
Okay. So do you have any response to the Canaanite issue, or do you want to just move on to the animal stuff?
I think the animals, both kind of serve the same idea, right? So it's like this judge. God is this judge. So
well, they're not the same. They're actually completely different scenarios.
Well, they're similar enough. So
I disagree.
I'll respond here. So I honestly, I forgot to respond to it. But yeah, so there's this idea here that God is this judge, right? God is able to do as he pleases because he has this ultimate authority, and this ultimate authority isn't arbitrary, but is oriented around some divine maximal standard. My question is, what is that standard? Because it doesn't seem to be, well, for lack of a better term, it just kind of seems arbitrary.
Okay. So, and I understand the question. So I believe with the Canaanite situation, different than the animal suffering in a lot of ways, I don't think that the Canaanite situation does anything to make that point, because simply said, the Canaanites, by the way, as are listed many times in the Old Testament as far as their sin, did sin from human sacrifice to rape to slavery to whatever you want to call it, all the different things they did in their pagan worship. I mean, they did sin that did not contort with God's law, and God, being just judge, is at will to punish them as he wishes. And if he doesn't do that, it is mercy. And so, I mean, I think if you're going to attack the Christian worldview from inside, I think you need a theology of sin that is consistent with what the scripture teaches. And at least with the Canaanite scenario, again, you have a very obvious sinful people, an obviously unrepentant people, a people that wants to do what's.
I didn't bring up the Canaanite.
Yeah, but I'm just responding. I just responding to that because I just wanted to make sure, because you kind of said the two situations were similar, and I just wanted to at least address that. When it comes to the animal suffering, again, I think some of this trades on, well, it seemed to me to be what your standard is for what God's standard should be. And so I'm confused with, like, so when animals experience suffering, okay, what do you consider to be like, specifically, I just want to understand as best you can, as best I can, what do you consider specifically to be inconsistent in God's standard when, say, animals suffer?
The obvious, grotesque experience. That's it.
So the experience of suffering is inherently, in and of itself, morally wrong.
Well, I'm not. So if you are imposing apparent grotesque suffering, we would say that's wrong on pretty much any standard of morality at all. Like, any standard that you want to impose, that is wrong. If we are gonna, if moral truths exist, rape is wrong, murder is wrong, and that is wrong too, right? And if that's not wrong, then what standard of morality are we using? And I want to respond here. God follows this standard. God is the standard too, by the way. If God does it, it's by his nature. He cannot contradict the essence of his nature.
I agree.
My question is this: what the hell is his nature? Okay. What is it? What is his nature? What allows grotesque animal suffering, yet says rape is wrong, yet says, yeah, I can kill civilizations, you can't?
Well, I did respond to the Canaanite thing with no substantive response from you. Well, but don't say that. Don't say, well, I can. Well, Alphanetic, don't say things like, I can kill civilizations, but you can't, when I have responded with a consistent theology of, say, sin to the Canaanite situation. So please don't sneak that back in here, because I think that those are different scenarios, number one. And number two, if you're going to toss that out there, I think you need to be able to respond to what I said about, say, the Canaanite situation. But we'll leave that for now. Again, the nature of course, I believe the nature of God is good. Okay, but that is not necessary. That doesn't necessarily lead to the fact that the world we exist in cannot exist. And what I mean by that is one of the main theodicies I think that a lot of Christians take on regards to sin and suffering is the idea that the fall of man was not just something that brought evil into man's hearts and then continued to reproduce, but a choice by man to choose suffering and sin over good and God. And that particular result plays itself out. Okay. And it's not, and I was talking to someone else recently, and they made a good point. It demands a holistic response. Okay. It's not simply just, well, the creation and the animals are left out of this particular fall of man, this pervasiveness of sin. No, sin is a pervasive thing that has attacked all of creation, not just man. And its very pervasiveness is the suffering that man experiences, and the sin itself that man commits is in it of itself destruction and suffering. And so, if you want, I mean, again, it depends on how you define choice, but like, if you want to put the suffering of animals on somebody in the Christian worldview, it's put on man and his choice to sin that brought upon the world a fallen state. Yeah, go ahead.
This is the problem with the fall theodicy.
Yeah. What's the problem?
God knew very well, going into creation, that this was going to happen.
Okay.
So there needs to be some other form of explanation for God's creation, because why would he create a world that's doomed to fall?
Okay,
That he
so
knows is going to fall, that he knows is going to cause so much suffering and torment, not just for humans. I think it's worse for animals. I really do.
okay,
Why would he create this system without some greater justification when he knows what's going to happen? There needs to be some other way to explain it, because here's the thing. If there is a world that exists where, we don't have sin, or if that world is impossible, because that seems to be a lot of the big claim here, then how can we have a place like heaven? Why didn't we just start there or something?
that's a good question.
But then this is when you would start going into, well, okay, then now we got to talk about the reasons that we're here on earth. Well, that's my point. The fall is not enough explanation. There needs to be more. The fall is not enough.
Okay.
We need more of an explanation.
Well, I believe God has a purpose and a plan to glorify himself. Okay, that is his purpose.
Okay.
And he's
so hundreds of trillions of beings are suffering because God wanted to glorify himself. I'm going to ask you, what is this standard of morality?
Okay, so I'm going to try to
What
finish.
is so good about that? That sounds evil.
Okay. Now, I will remind you that just because God's plan is to glorify himself, you can't then put him as the responsible party for the choices of sin. You can't do that. It's not the same. And to say, well, God knew it in advance does not mean that he made the choice to do it. Okay, and so I think conflating those two is not consistent. But what you asked a question, Alphanetic, you asked a question about purpose. Okay, and God does have a purpose he wanted to create man, and he wanted to create a people in his own image, and he wanted to give them the ability to love him and relate with him, and they chose to sin. They chose to rebel against him. Now, if God allows evil and suffering temporarily to then redeem later what he has done in order for the greater glory, I mean, you can't say that that's not purposed, okay? Because to answer the question of purpose, now you might say, well, I don't like the temporary suffering. Fine, but that is not a sufficient argument against the existence of God. That's just you emoting about your feeling about it.
Yeah. So I first what I wanted to interject with was I didn't realize I was yelling, but I totally was.
We both do that. It's fine.
Passionate. Dude, we both love this stuff. We both love talking about this stuff. And thank you, dude. Some people have been here for literally the entire time, guys. We've been going for an hour and a half.
You guys are cool. I don't even feel like any time's passed. You know what I'm saying?
I'm starting to get a little fatigued, I will say. Like I'm picking up what you're putting down a lot of the time, but then I'll have a response, and then you'll keep talking. I'll be like, shit.
No, yeah, real. I get there too.
So that's a result of 11 p.m. So yeah. But yeah, so that's it. What you just talked about, that's what we refer to as the soul-making theodicy.
Okay.
Which is
that's not my theodicy for animal suffering, but soul-making is certainly a part of the human existence.
No, but that's what I'm saying. So it's like we have this thing, we have suffering because we need it in order to prosper.
Well, that's not what I said. I didn't say we need it in order to prosper.
Okay, but this is just the general idea, though. So but then the reason that people point to this is because it's kind of like saying, okay, we need suffering then, but then if we need suffering, then we can't point back to the fall and say, oh, well, this is on us. Well, not really. Apparently, it was all part of the plan anyway, because it's something that is pretty much required in order to build a soul. But you would say that that's not the case. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't think it's required to build a soul. I think that just because we can identify that the soul is definitely different, having gone through suffering and sin, and then if it hadn't, it doesn't mean it's required. So I'm not saying that we must have had suffering, but it doesn't change that God had a purpose in what He did. You propose a world. You live in a world, Alphanetic, that also has animal suffering. Okay, but I can at least say that God has a purpose in that. And to take it a step further, I would say the scripture indicates clearly that all creation will be redeemed. This is in Romans 8. I don't know if you've read the scripture. And there's a couple other places that would imply this in the Bible. Basically, not saying that like, hey, well, they're going to be okay in the end, so it's justified. What I'm saying is God is working with a purpose that has allowed evil for a time in order to accomplish a greater good. And the only ones who will eternally not benefit from it are the ones who don't want to, the ones who have decided that they'd rather live apart from God than with him. Okay. But you have to understand that just because God is in control, it doesn't mean that he is the one who initially is causing, right, actually causally making happen the suffering of animals. Because again, I think a weak theology of sin is the only way you could ignore the fact that there are consequences to sin. There are consequences to rebellion against God, and they don't just manifest in the spirit, they manifest themselves in creation. Okay, I mean, when it says in Romans 8, all creation groans, waiting for eager longing for the redemption of the world. It's not just saying that one day there will be a redemption that they look forward to. It's identifying that there is a response to the current state of the world in which creation groans. Groaning would indicate some sort of negative state, as you might say, right? So I mean, this is I just feel like there are so many theological points here that I don't even know maybe if you've come in contact with that help to build a world which understands why it happened. Now, you could then say to me, okay, well, I don't think that's great. I don't like that animals suffer. I don't like that there's pain. Fine. But the be all and end all as to what is good and what isn't is not based on how much pain is felt. Okay? That's not the determiner as to whether good is happening or bad is happening, just based on, well, what is the measure of the amount of pain that is being felt? And that's right. That's not true in the Christian worldview. I wouldn't say necessarily it's true in most people's worldviews, but I feel like you're applying a standard that says, well, I don't like pain, and the hedonistic utopia would be the ideal world, and that's not what I see, therefore God can't be good. I mean, I really don't know how that follows.
Yeah. So if we can have like a system, if we have a system where suffering is completely needed, right? A pain is needed, then yeah, sure. I don't disagree then that it would be for a greater good, which is good, right? And then through that we would have an explanation. I don't have any issue with that. It's that I don't think that the greater good is very much of an explanation. For one, we do not really have any evidence that animals go to heaven, nor do we have any evidence that they do this process of deification, which is that they take all of the lessons that they learned, and then they go to heaven, and then they're able to logic all through it, and they're able to figure it out. And then actually, some of the authors that I've wrote on attribute it similar to like Narnia, like animals start talking in heaven, right?
You never know, right? We don't know.
Like C.S. Lewis. We don't know for certain.
I agree.
But that would be really weird, considering we have a lot of verses that attribute animals as just creatures of instinct who are born to be caught and destroyed.
Can you cite one?
It doesn't sound very imago Dei. It doesn't sound like that's and especially we also know for pretty much for certain that animals are not made in the image of God.
Okay, so could I stop you there? Because I'm actually curious about this. If they're not made in the image of God, and so on what basis can you call the pain that you say they experience? Again, on the other side, we can't actually prove they experience that pain. We can prove they experience what would be similar physical stimuli, but we can't actually say they experience the same pain as humans. It might be something else. We can't be conclusive on that. But on what basis do you say that it's wrong for them to experience pain? Because it seems like you're making a wrong claim. You're not just saying it's like, I don't like it. You're saying that it's wrong that animals experience any sort of pain. Why is that wrong?
I'm saying it's because there's no standard of morality that seems to make any sense that would deem that okay, but whatever the theological general murder is wrong and rape is wrong.
What it seems like what you're saying is I can't think of a standard you seems like you're saying is I can't think of a standard that I like that would allow for that, and so therefore it doesn't work. Well, that's not an argument. You're not showing me that my God is inconsistent. You're just saying that you don't like it. I mean, and that's what I'm concerned about.
That your God doesn't. So, in the nicest way possible, I'm saying that the standard is. I think in my naturalistic world, because put yourself in my eyes for a second.
I'm trying.
I see a God that you're pointing to that seems to be relatively arbitrary according to conveniently what the culture thought was okay at the time. And now that's just kind of like
I
a
would disagree with that heavily,
implication
but no.
in my hindsight. But it
The
seems to be quite
it's
strange
fine.
that, in my perspective here, and it seems to make a lot of sense that we have this God that, this is supposed to be, right, the reasonable inference. This is supposed to be the best explanation that we have. Why would I reasonably think that this deity, who we can't even point, I'm sorry, that we can't even point to in having some form of accurate or measurable standard in any way, is the best explanation? And that right there is my problem.
Okay, well, again, that assumes that there's not an accurate and measurable standard. I mean, like, I don't know. I just don't understand how you're bringing that assumption in. I don't really know where that comes from.
Let's stop at 11:15. Let's stop.
Okay, we can do that.
I'm getting pretty
tired. I'm getting
tired
as well. But I think this conversation needs to be continued. I feel like your understanding of what God's law is and what sin is just feels too lacking for even what I respond to you with to make sense. Because I mean, I'm trying to offer you an understanding that puts God in the place that he would be. And that would be his place as creator, his place as judge, and the fact that he is revealed to us a purpose that he's accomplishing, which because of the sin of the world has brought upon the world a fallen state where there are consequences. I've offered this. I don't feel like you've refuted it. I just feel like you say, well, you don't think God has a consistent standard, but it doesn't. I don't think you really know what God's standard is. You're not a Levitical expert. And so I'm confused as to what you're coming up with. I mean, so any point that the only points that you might have brought up to try to challenge God's standard, other than animal suffering, which again, we're still trying to get to somewhere on at least why is even wrong in the first place that they suffer. But when we get there, we'll continue. But the only other examples you brought up would be examples in the Bible, and then I gave you an even harder one and responded to it, and you didn't have a response for it. Regard to the Canaanites. Obviously, I could respond to anything else you mentioned in the Bible that had to do with the God bringing his judgment to bear on a sinful people. But I mean, I don't really know where to go from here besides to say I don't think you grasp what the Christian believes very well. Like I was expecting at least that you might be at least trying to understand what we believe and bringing an argument in regards to animal suffering that would say it's more likely in naturalism than it is in theism, or realizing that it's a problem that it's hard to be conclusive on either side, and just try to at least get into some of those details. But instead, it seems like all you're saying is you don't like it, that your particular internal standard that you have come up with, which somehow is supposed to be taken as more exhaustive than my Lord's, is just it conflicts with what you think God is doing, by the way. You think his standard is, and therefore you can't accept that God. And to me, that seems really shallow, Alphanetic.
So I think that this is that because I think that was a pretty good summary of your point here. So I think that this is going to be a good place to wrap up, but I want to kind of say my final thoughts here.
Sure.
So the word of the day that I want people to walk away with is going to be arbitrary. I think that the standard that God uses is arbitrary. And now I think that is a result of this God not existing. I think that is the most realistic scenario, that this God just doesn't.
Can you just say how it's arbitrary? Like, how is it arbitrary? What are you defining arbitrary as? How do we come to this conclusion? How can I be Alphanetic and walk from where I am to that conclusion?
Yeah. So it okay. And again, this is the end because I'm.
All right, that's fine. I just want to really try to understand.
I'm not all there right now. But so arbitrary is just random. I'm saying that we have this standard of morality that demands an explanation, yet seems to not really make sense with the arbiter that we are pointing to. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because we can see a clear negative psychological impact in these animals. They are experiencing something horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say it's horrible is because well, again, I've said this already, but I since this is wrap up, I'll allow it. Put your hand on a stove. Go and stab yourself in the heart. Do you like that? Probably not. And the chances are that they're not going to like it either. So when I'm watching it happen over and over and over again, well, there needs to be some form of explanation, because justice is the very thing that we say needs an explanation.
Okay.
So when I'm saying there should be some form of justice here, and then you say, well, it doesn't matter because you're not even coming up with a standard yourself. Well, I'm just saying that apparently justice doesn't even matter to the being who is demanding an explanation, or the being that explains justice itself. Like, where is this justice at? It seems completely arbitrary and built around humans. This theistic moral realism, which is something that is very native and aged and completely dated. And I think that that's just a result of this God not existing. So I'll say that the pill of naturalism still goes down smooth. We
Okay.
have explanations for morality. We have explanations for saying this seems wrong. Maybe we can't make an empirical 2 + 2 is 4 claim on it, but I can substantiate it, and I'm okay with that. And I don't think that this is some absolutely damning position that rocks the world of the atheist or the agnostic.
Okay. Do I get a response, a final statement, or are we done?
Sure, go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
So I guess after this we're done. I think I've made myself clear tonight. I think that
You've done good, dude. I think this was a productive talk.
Yeah. I think that we have to take seriously creating positions that are consistent and are reasonable and logical within the reality we live in. And that means that the position we create, if we want to take that position and hold it up against other ones and attempt to take them down according to the position and worldview we have, then we better have something that is factual. We better have something that is not just based on feeling and experience. And so I have heard many good atheistic positions, or at least attempted strong, reason-based atheistic positions that have attempted to argue from animal suffering or argue from the moral argument and all sorts of things that cover details that we didn't even get into tonight that I have been studying. And I feel that Alphanetic's position has just not even touched that avenue yet. At the end of the day, what he seems to be saying to me is that that God's standard is arbitrary. He doesn't know what it is. He hasn't read and studied it. He can't tell me what about it is arbitrary. He can't tell me what specifically in God's standard causes animal suffering to be an evil that God is committing. There's no explanations or understanding of my position that where I have to then deal with a challenge. He's just saying that he doesn't like what the state of the world is, and he couldn't imagine a good God, however he defines good in this case, to let that happen. Now, there are answers to these questions, and I have put out partial ones of some that I could, given the information Alphanetic has offered me, but I feel like his worldview did not even start to touch the issues. If your moral claims are not even moral claims, then I don't know how you can turn around and tell me that my God is wrong when you can't even call anything wrong. You can just only call it distasteful to your preference. And that's why I was hoping we'd argue more moral objectivism, and we did not. So I guess we'll leave you guys all to think on those things that we've both said. I've appreciated the time. It is 11:15. How about that?
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I can answer some questions.
If we want to do Q&A, we'll let Q&A happen. If we'll let it wrap up. You can let Tunix talk if we want, though. I don't want this to run forever because honestly, I'm tired too. Here's what we're doing. If you have a question, not a comment, Tunic. If you have a question, you can ask it, and you can just save other things for a little bit later. Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to say that there's a false dichotomy here. Just a short comment. There is no God standard. God has no standard. That doesn't exist. So you can't be arguing it's arbitrary. The standard is God.
Is that a question?
God has his own standard. But whatever. My question for Alphanetic is that whenever you start describing the animal suffering, right? You're using this term you're almost acting like God is the causer or the arbiter of the suffering. And I want to know if you think is that what you think like classical theism's position is, that God causes the suffering?
The classical theistic position is that man sinned, and because man sinned, well, classical theism, it just envelops a maximal deity. I don't think that envelops Christianity. Am I wrong there? I think that's more Western. But hold on. Yep, not happening. Sorry. I think that's more Western. Thank you for laundry. I don't think that is something that that totally just lost my fucking train of thought right there. I'm so sorry.
Bro, I'll do your laundry, bro.
But regardless, it doesn't matter. My perspective here is that according to the Bible, man sinned, and because man sinned, we are in this fall now, this sinful world with suffering and pain, and because of that, animals are enveloped in that too. That's what the classical theistic position is.
Yeah. But the problem is that I think that you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are you then attributing that position? Like, do you think God is the cause of the fall?
Yeah. God is the cause of the fall. Maybe not directly, but is Jigsaw the cause of the people in the puzzles?
But that's not a very comparative. I would say probably more similarly.
Very, very 1D
like,
view of God.
Is the judge the cause of the prisoner being in prison? I don't think so. I think it's the prisoner that chose to then go to prison.
No, but if I mess up, should trillions, or sorry, more accurately, people, will stick to people, hundreds of billions of people suffer extreme ramifications because.
Well, even if it's animals, I agree that it's a.
Well, wait, let me jump in on this. Let me jump in on this though, because no, I want to catch this. You say if I'm assuming when you say if I mess up, should billions of people suffer? You're talking about Adam's result on creation. Yeah. So this is the Bible. And again, I would encourage you to read through Romans, but the Bible talks about a concept in it called federal headship, and the idea is that it's understanding that we are not just individual, arbitrary other people. We have come from Adam and Eve. We are descended from them. And so when Adam sinned, we sinned in Adam. It doesn't just say we inherited the consequences. It says we sin in him. Basically, a lot of people describe it as you take anyone else, you take Alphanetic and put them in the same situation, you'd end up with the same sin, because or however else you want to describe it. Or the point is that the sin is committed by everybody. That's where original sin is come from. It's done in Adam as we are descendants of him. So when you say Adam is just, created a crappy life for everybody else, you have to understand that the fact that we are descended of him means that not only would we have done what he have done, we are not just departed from Adam as his descendants. We probably would have done it quicker, given the fact that we are even further descended from an imperfect set of two people, right? To assume that Adam has just negatively affected a bunch of neutral or wonderful people would be to say that somehow Adam and Eve in the creation of descendants have made better people than themselves. And that would seem just a little off to say that imperfect people could then create more perfecter people than themselves. That would not make sense. And hence where original sin and federal headship comes from.
So I actually agree with you. So then the fall has nothing to do with anything, and it was just that way, and it was going to always be that way.
No, well, that's not what we're saying.
If you say that, what do you mean though? Because do you think that, I think the problem is that you are equating God temporally, right? So we would argue that, well, even though God has foreknowledge of the fall, it doesn't mean that he caused the fall, because that establishes a temporal relationship that we know doesn't exist because God's nature is atemporal. So even if God knew that it was going to happen, there isn't no like, oh, I foreknew it was going to happen. It's just God knew, knows, will know. There's no way to really comprehend that sort of, infinity in the human mind. So it's not really something that we can so, dogmatically state. Like, was there a time period in which God knew and then caused? There's no such thing. Okay. We say that as a result, things came to be as a result of God. He's the causer, right? But in Christian theology, we don't equate cause temporally, right? Because we also believe the Father's the cause of the Son, but we both believe They've always existed and are uncreated. So how can the Father be the cause if the Son is also uncreated, right? Like, it doesn't go with human logic, but in this theological logic, which isn't bound. The Son was definitely not. It's Arianism. It's heresy.
Yeah, Son is eternally existed. Yes. As the Son. Yes.
Eternally begotten.
That's a Trinitarian theology. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So again, it's not even, you have to equate these things with a very different perspective, because God is not legalistic in this sense. It's not like Adam sinned and then God punished. It was this all has to do with nature.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, the nature of man chose to be a certain way. Okay. And in doing so, since we share the nature of Adam, we then share the choice of man. Okay. So in a sense, it wasn't God that caused animals to suffer as punishment for our sin. It wasn't like that. It wasn't legalistic in that sense. It was that we as humanity chose to suffer. And this suffering is not complete unless the world around us suffers. Okay, it's this holistic suffering of creation because we have headship over creation. Okay, we're in a sense spiritual arbiters of creation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I like how he said it. I think I was trying to communicate something of the sort, but I know we got caught up in a lot of other types of conversation. But I mean, I do want to point out, like, on top of that I when it comes to the argument from animal suffering, Alphanetic, if you want to make this argument as a way to discredit Christianity, you really, really, really need to understand what our theology is in order to make a case.
I'm not making a claim to discredit.
No, but I mean, well, in a sense, you are, right? You're saying that would
really
call into question our God, the existence of animal suffering. But what I'm saying is like, for an argument like this, I would expect that.
No, it's just I'm curious what a standard is.
Fair enough. But like,
and what's going on? Because technically, yeah, could exist. Sure. Does it draw a serious question, a character question? Oh yeah, it does.
But see, in your perspective, it does. But see, the reason it doesn't, in my perspective, Alphanetic, is not because I'm just a hateful person who wants animals to die. It's because I have a theology that systematically can account for the fullness of reality, and it's a theology that, again, the Scripture has incredible depth to it, and it requires more study than just the cursory Pinewood Forest video or whatever that guy's name is that you send me every once in a while, right? I mean, like, it requires really understanding what's trying to be communicated, and like the study, and me and Tunic both do a lot of scriptural study, and so that's why we sit here and say, okay, I understand the emotion you're giving. I agree. Animal suffering sucks. I'm not wanting animals to get hurt. I'm not wanting them to die. I'm not going around saying like, I feel like I've answered that, but I just want to make a point here. But like, I am understanding that the worldview I have, the scripture I have, does account, okay, sufficiently for that as a part of my worldview in a way where it doesn't make me have to say, well, God's evil because this is happening. But I think that you misunderstand us because you don't like understand our theologies of sin and existence and causal relationships, and say secondary means, I would say, is important there.
I understand quite well. I understand pretty well. It's not a lack of understanding. Trust me on that. It's a difference in opinion, and I really also I'm not sure. Again, I'm tired. I don't know if you could tell.
No, I totally get it. I am too.
We've made this huge divergence onto the beginning of sin, and
it's important here
where that came from. I in all honesty, I haven't. You guys probably know more. No, not probably. You guys know more about that than I
would hope so. We're Christians. If we didn't, we'd be in trouble.
But I do think that there is an implication here where I want to respond to Tunic here.
Sure.
There is a huge implication, and I do still stand by, this one's on God. He created this realm knowing exactly what was going to happen and put the pieces he literally put the snake in the garden. It's like it's not only did he know that you were going to open a door, he put the friggin' key there and put like a shining like gold plate on it. Like, he didn't do the thing, but he not only strongly encouraged it, but like he was, hey, don't do this. like, okay, all right, yeah, on a technicality, sure, he's not the one doing it, but it's like
On
if
a
we're really
technicality
getting
is
and
quite a thing
looking
to
at
say.
it, yeah, this
Well,
one's
it's
on
not.
him.
We would acknowledge that the things put in place were put in place. But the
Yeah.
problem is that if they weren't, then we have another issue or theological problems, an insurpassable one, okay, that we can't allow to happen, which is the denial of will. Okay, so if man could not then will to disobey God, okay, so God gave man the means to disobey God, but man had the will to do so. Okay, so the will is the contingency. Okay, and if those things didn't exist, then we wouldn't be able to have the will to disobey God. And so then we would be slaves to God in a sense, which is something that we would not accept as a possibility. So even if you accept that somehow God is temporally bound and put all these things with this foreknowledge and trying to, plan out the fall of man, okay, we know that if he had not done so, man would not be able to choose him or against him.
Okay,
Okay,
so
and
I
that's
just want to
more
make sure I'm hearing you correctly. So it sounds like you're admitting that you're biased here and you're looking for an explanation because on the surface it doesn't seem right. So it has to be otherwise or your worldview crumbles.
Well,
no, it's a logical
See why I'm
necessity. It's a
unconvinced?
logical necessity.
I mean, I feel like I'm not an accessible audience member right now because I don't believe it. I don't presuppose the belief.
no,
I
but
don't
but,
have
Well,
but,
any.
right,
but,
but
but
again,
Alphanetic.
we
Sorry
know
to,
that.
but Alphanetic.
Yep.
Again, the critique being made here is an internal critique. So in order to in order to work with the critique you're making, you have to assume our
No,
worldview
I
to work with it.
understand.
No, but we're
I understand.
trying to
And
point out that
and
in our worldview, it is logically inconsistent. It's not possible to have a world where God is creating people and not giving them the ability to express their will. If Adam had no
okay,
ability to
okay,
express a will to
hold on.
disobey God, then he's a robot. He doesn't. There's no will. There's no ability for him to love or not love. Okay, and that's a logical issue, not just a way out. I mean, this is. I don't know how you don't see
Man,
this.
sounds like we're pretty good non-believers here then, because if we can all agree, then we're on the same page. That's what I'm talking about. In all honesty,
Alphanetic,
I don't know what you're
I
talking
what I was
agree
about.
with
going
you
to
guys.
say
There is a problem. There is a serious
is
problem with the
is
consistency.
that
And here's the thing:
regardless,
I cannot grant. Hold on. I cannot grant truth statements to what you're saying. I can just say, is this reasonable? Does this make the most sense? Right? That's kind of the whole goal of everything here. We're trying to determine if this is consistent. Yeah, it seems to be not consistent, but I can't grant the premise that it's already true and then try and work around it.
No,
We're trying to
well, that's not
determine
what
if
you're
it makes
doing.
sense
well,
or
so
not.
what about
The
his?
story
You're
doesn't
not
seem to
finding
make
anything
sense.
inconsistent here.
You didn't find the inconsistency.
Yeah. There's no. I'm not seeing where
Okay,
you're
but that's
seeing it.
exactly what you guys seem to be talking about, though. This
Well,
inconsistency.
well,
You're
what we're
saying
saying
that,
is
well,
that this free will. When
okay,
you're
well,
saying
maybe the
that, I'm
story's
assuming
just
it is not true, but I think that the problem is that whenever you equate, whenever I'm talking about that, oh, it must be this way. I'm not saying it must be this way to satisfy my worldview. I'm saying it must be this way to
Yeah.
logically allow for free will in the naturalistic sense that
Exactly.
we understand it. Okay, it's not even that it's so much free will from a theological sense, but if we were to have naturalistic free will, we must logically have the ability to choose for or to choose against something. It's within human ability. And so if God created us, okay, to not be able to choose against him, okay, if we were created that way, then not only would that deny naturalistic um I'll say dogmas because that's really what they are, naturalistic dogmas of choice, but it would also contradict Christian theology. So my point is, regardless of who you are, it's a logical contradiction to get rid of choice and also have free will. Like that can't happen.
Yeah.
There's no
I wonder what your
presupposition.
thoughts are on determinism. Do you have any? Do you
I
understand
don't
that?
I don't know the word off the top of my head. What do you mean by?
Okay. Well, that's, I guess, that Marble Guy. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I mean, can you define it in a way? I mean, this is not.
Sure. So
This is just.
determinism it's actually really simple to explain. Because I guess it's kind of relevant and it's also fun. Now we're kind of just having fun.
I guess so.
And
Yeah.
I'm fine. Yeah. Let's wrap this up here. But yeah. So determinism is essentially the belief that there is no such thing as free will. And it's essentially just the idea that, well, there's two kinds of actions that we can do. We can do actions that we're forced to do, and there's actions that we want to do, and that there's no in between. But the want actions that we have, right? Me going and waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning so I can go and walk my dog. Do I want to wake up and do that? No, I really don't.
No.
Okay.
I want to. Okay, what the fuck? Sorry. Okay.
All right.
But I want my dog to not pee on the floor. And I want that more than me staying in bed. I want my dog to stay on the floor, or to go out, and so he would not pee on the floor. I wanted that more. And the thing is, that's how we make every decision. It's weighted on what we want more than one thing. But the thing is, are we really deciding whether or not we want one thing more than another?
The problem is that this whole idea presupposes that just because I want something more than another means that I then am forced to do that thing.
Yeah, and force is not the word I would use.
Even if I'd rather my dog walk than not pee on my floor, I could still choose to have the dog pee on my floor, even if I don't want it as much. Okay, because I have this ability to choose that. It's not like I lose the ability to choose.
Ability to do so. Yet the thing is that it seems to be that maybe we don't actually have the ability to do so because, well, why didn't you want your dog to piss on the floor? Why didn't you want that more than the other thing?
Well, it doesn't actually matter because I don't have to choose it. So it's like you're saying, oh, you can't choose will, so therefore you can't choose action. But that doesn't mean anything. My will might be determined by some other factors. Usually it's going to be some logical factor, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean that my actions always have to follow my will. So it doesn't actually, defy the idea of this free choice. Well, it really...
Try and think of an action where you don't have the thing that you want as the thing that you act on. Try and think of an example of where it's not oriented around what you want more than another.
Million.
What about if you act out of feeling?
Let's use
like
one
overwhelming feeling comes over you. You act in a way that you normally wouldn't, and then you come to regret it after the fact.
In what scenario?
Because maybe you get really angry
or something,
and you say something bad and you normally wouldn't say that to that person, but you got angry in that moment, so you did something that doesn't really go against your general will, but you did it.
But you did it.
Like you spontaneously do something, like you spontaneously rape or something.
All right, hang on, guys. You know what? Cool. You know what? But I'm going to end the stream. Thank you for everyone who came out of the stream. You guys can yap all you want. By the way, just a random thought for Tuvik, Calvinism and determinism are not the same. I don't know if that will ever come up in the future, but they're not. And that's how I'm going to end the stream. So good talk, Alphanetic. This was a lot of fun. I'm sure for anyone listening this far, we've been just yapping nonsense for 15 minutes, but I'm sure we'll be back with some more good stuff in the future. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and everybody, please don't do that. And everyone who's come into the call as well. I hope this was helpful for those as we've been thinking through these